When I was a little girl, I refused to go to bed until I could tuck all of my dolls in their beds and sing Alecrim to each, a Brazilian lullaby. In those days, I didn't dream about my wedding, traveling the world, or becoming a ballerina. I dreamed of being a mother. Well, the day came a little bit sooner than planned, when one day in my last semester of nursing school, during my OB clinicals, I took a test just for fun. My husband and I couldn't be more excited. We dedicated all of our energy to get everything ready for our little one, who's crying right now in the back. I wanted everything to be perfect. I had always had an intense desire to be a mother and was so excited my time was here. Evan and I read every pregnancy and delivery book we could find. The nursery was ready by month 2. I attended every prenatal yoga class near us, and I had a deep, innate desire to have an unmedicated birth. So I did everything I could to prepare myself physically and emotionally. A few weeks before my baby's delivery, the world shut down due to COVID. No more baby shower, no more prenatal yoga, no more classes, no more community. The snowball of events was just beginning to happen. And then I got a call from one of the OBs in my practice. She explained that due to the pandemic, they had to change some hospital policies. First, all visits from now on would be virtual. Okay. Second, elective inductions were highly encouraged to keep the numbers low in the hospital. Okay. And third, partners and support people were not allowed to join the birthing mother. Fathers were meeting their babies in the parking lot. Not okay. She explained they were working on changing the policy, but since my due date was quickly approaching, she wasn't sure if it was to change by the time I delivered. Without giving me a second to catch my breath, she asked if I was ready to go ahead and schedule my elective induction. I didn't know what to say, so I hung up and never called back. Determined to find a better solution for my family, I began to call every birth center and midwife in town. And finally, at 36 and a half weeks, I found a midwife that took me in, and I could catch my breath again. Well, the due date came and went, and every day in isolation felt like an eternity. And at 42 weeks, my contractions finally started. This was it. This was our day. I was up all night with regular contractions, and after 12 hours of laboring at home, we arrived at the birth center right at 8 in the morning. Everyone was cheerful and saying how quickly this was going to go by. I was at 10 centimeters and ready to push by noon. Breathing through each contraction in my breathing pool, I looked up at the clock as my midwife said, "Alice, you can do this. She'll be here in the next hour. And she has dark hair." So I pushed with everything in me. But that hour went by and nothing. 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, the pains and the pushing was harder and harder to manage. We tried every position in the book, squatting, lying on all fours, moving in and out of the tub, different breathing techniques, but nothing. 4, 5, and 6 o'clock. Baby wasn't coming. She was sunny side up, and with her hands stuck by her face, she got stuck. And with double peak contractions a couple minutes apart, my body couldn't take it anymore, and I started to faint between every contraction. I had a team of experienced women supporting me. The environment was calm, comforting, and safe, but it was time to go to the hospital. So with my hands between my legs, completely nude, holding my baby's head, feeling her hair, we got into our little Toyota. My husband drove, the midwife sat in the back with me, holding my body every time I fainted in between our contraction, and woke up screaming and pushing in agony every time one returned. Arriving at the hospital, everything changed. I was propped on all fours in a wheelchair by new faces I had never seen. Everyone was horrified. They attempted to place a sheet to cover my completely nude body, but my contractions were too powerful. The tech pushing my wheelchair said this was it. My support team was not allowed to follow me in. But I was a feral animal at this point. Fight or flight fear took over my body, and I bit the hand of the tech pushing my wheelchair. They made an exception. My husband was able to follow me in. My midwife and her team had to stay behind. We quickly made it to the OR. We were surrounded by a dozen students, residents, and everyone in between. I felt like the freak show that everyone wanted to watch. They needed to get baby unstuck from my birth canal, and before anesthesia was able to take its effect, the OB shoved the baby back up to my belly. It felt like every bone in my body was breaking, and my soul was going with it. Tightly holding my husband's hands, we looked at each other and cried in fear. And after 24 hours of labor and 7 hours of pushing, our baby girl was finally delivered at 8:59 p.m. I woke up confused in a hospital bed with oxygen and lines in my veins, trying to piece together what happened. My husband was asleep in the other side of the room, and the baby in a bassinet between the two of us, and she was starting to cry. I wanted to see what she looked like, pick her up and soothe her, do the skin to skin I'd waited months for. But I couldn't. Still completely numb from surgery, I was unable to move or even sit up to see her little face. And after many hours of screaming in pain during labor, my voice was gone. Mute and unable to move, I was powerless. Behind the curtains on the other side, I heard a couple of nurses talking when one of them said, "Birth center moms are just asking for emergency C-sections." I felt small, ashamed, undeserving to be a mom. During the rest of my hospital stay, I continued to feel judged, and comments that were meant to be comforting, like, "You're lucky you're both alive, and at least you know what not to do next time," broke me to pieces. Instead of the regular 2 to 3 nights in a hospital post a C-section, we were promptly discharged at 24 hours. To keep the numbers low in the hospital. I could barely walk at that point from my bed to the toilet. My voice was still gone, and my husband just as traumatized as I was. We were unequipped to care for ourselves and baby. No one ever acknowledged our trauma or educated us on postpartum depression. And I want you to hear me when I say this. Yes, the birth of my baby was traumatic, but the way we were treated is what sent me down a spiral. At 2 weeks postpartum, my mom was back in her home state and my husband back at work. The world was still at a standstill due to COVID. It was just baby and me, isolated once again. To be honest, I barely remember the first few weeks. My dream of being an amazing mother had collapsed. I had given birth to this beautiful baby, but I felt dead inside. At first, I completely disassociated myself from friends and family. I didn't answer texts or calls. Then I became unable to do simple things like brush my teeth or change out of dirty clothes. When Evan called me during his lunch break, simple questions like, "Has the baby had a poopy diaper today?" would break me. I didn't know. I didn't know if I changed her diaper an hour ago or 3 days ago. I couldn't remember if I had showered that week or months ago. Felt like I was living in an illusion, and telling reality from nightmare was near impossible. Outbursts of emotion and horrific intrusive thoughts were never ending, so all-consuming that I couldn't cook. because the sight of a knife made me want to stab somebody. I couldn't drive because when I did, all I wanted to do was purposely crash my car. The sound of my baby crying made me want to throw her out the window. The images in my head were a never-ending horror film. And since I couldn't tell what day it was, I ended up missing my 2 and 6 week postpartum checks. When one day, my birth center midwife, worried, just showed up at my house. And she knew I desperately needed help. She stayed for hours, caring for me and the baby. She set me up with every resource she could think of, signed me up for support groups, made me an appointment with an amazing perinatal therapist. And the healing process finally begun. With the strong support of a community of women, therapy, and doctors, I slowly started to feel human again. Things were slowly moving along, and right at 6 months postpartum, I could see a glimpse of hope in our future. I started to brush my teeth and get out outside of the house for the first time in months, go on walks with my baby, just around the block. And it was in one of those walks where I felt a funny sensation in my lower belly, and with what it felt like the weight of the world falling upon my shoulders, I knew I was pregnant again. I was just starting to live in reality, but my nightmare was returning. I could not do this again. I would not survive this again. Fear took over, and it felt like the world was ending. I drove over to a gym with a free drop-in daycare. I left and started calling my therapist. I left her a voicemail, letting her know my baby was safe in her daycare, but I did not want to live anymore. My husband wasn't picking up his phone, and the local help center was short-staffed. So I drove to the nearest emergency room. I needed help before I did something terrible. There in the parking lot, my therapist returned my call. "I'm right here with you, Alice," she said. Together we made a plan, and she stayed with me on the phone until I was surrounded by my family. With the full support of my husband, both of our families, my midwife, therapist, and friends, I decided to keep my pregnancy. And I was determined to have a different story. I wanted to be alive and well for both my babies. I knew that our delivery and treatment after delivery were the key factors that sent me down that spiral. And if I was going to have a different outcome this time, I needed to trust my body again, to not feel broken anymore. I needed to do everything to not have a cesarean again. I immersed myself in communities of moms with similar stories. I studied all of the evidence-based research on vaginal births, post-C-sections I could find. I spoke with experienced midwives and doctors and had continuous support from my wonderful doula and therapist. But the battle wasn't over. Finding a provider in my area who would allow me to attempt a vaginal birth again was near impossible. I got comments like, "Alice, you're a nurse, you should know better." And, "Are you really willing to risk yours and baby's life again?" I saw a different OB in every prenatal appointment, searching for the one who would say yes. And yet they all said no, explaining to me that the risk of a VBAC was too dangerous. What they didn't see is that the risk of me returning to that dark mental space was far more dangerous. They used non-evidence-based research and outdated hospital policies to induce fear in me. I cried for hours in hospital parking lot after each appointment. But I was not going to make my decision based on fear. With encouragement from my doula, I continued my search, and late in my third trimester, I was received with open arms by a group of OBs an hour away, who were not only trauma-informed, but they believed in me even more than I did myself. With their support and encouragement, I knew I could do this. On the morning of October 3rd, 2021, I woke up at 5 a.m. with regular contractions. We quickly packed our bags, called my doula, and arrived at the hospital an hour later. I felt ready. I felt safe. 5 women physically held me, and even more were in my mind saying, "You got this." Less than an hour and 2 pushes later, I caught my beautiful 9-pound baby and brought her onto my chest. And we all shed tears of joy. Having 2 kids close in age sure has had its own trials, but this time I knew my name. I could look at a knife and make dinner. I could confidently leave the house with both my kids, knowing I would never hurt them. I reached out to friends when I needed help. I enjoyed being a mother, and I knew I was a good one. 2 years ago, I attended my first Moms Like Me event. I came here pregnant and alone. We had just moved into town, and I didn't know anyone yet. Quietly, with tears in my eyes, I listened to the inspiring stories from other moms, anxious if I would be able to have my VBAC, anxious if I would survive postpartum again, anxious if I would be able to build my village. But I did it. Today, I'm here surrounded by friends and family whom I love. I'm working in the field I love the most as a mother-baby nurse at Bozeman Health. And I get the honor to be one of the pillars in other mamas support teams. Eloise and Anna Lou are now 3 and 1.5, and they are the light of my life. My story wasn't what I had dreamed of. It's getting even better.